We've got a packed program this morning with a great lineup of speakers and panelists. So without further ado, I shall introduce you to our MEP host and chair of MEPs for Wildlife, Hilde Woutmans. Hilde, please take it away.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to the MEPs for Wildlife webinar on wildlife and environmental crime. As chairwoman of MEPs for Wildlife, I'm very delighted to announce that we are many today, as you already said, over 450 registrations. And I would like to thank each and every one of you for your interest. I would also like to thank today's speakers and panelists. We are very grateful for the time and effort you take to share your thoughts and experiences on this important topic. 2 weeks ago, on the 3rd of March, we celebrated World Wildlife Day. Wildlife is under threat from many different kinds of human activities. Climate change is one of them. We all remember, for example, the big fires in the Amazon forest in Australia, killing thousands of animals and plants and destroying their natural habits. But there is another human activity which has its devastating impact on wildlife. And that is, you all know it, wildlife trafficking. To those who think wildlife trafficking or other forms of wildlife crime doesn't happen here in Europe, you are wrong. The EU is widely considered to be, listen carefully, the 3rd largest destination for illegal wildlife. At the moment, illegal wildlife trade is the 4th largest destination, is the 4th largest illegal global trade, after drugs, arms, and human trafficking. It is estimated that illegal wildlife trade activities worldwide are generating between 8 and 20 billion euros each year. So fighting wildlife crime is very much of our concern here in Europe, not only because wildlife trafficking is decimating the populations of many ironic wildlife species, but also because it's fueling insecurity and undermining many key goals in EU foreign and development policy, such as the rule of law, good governance, and peace and stability. And after the past years, we all realize very well that wildlife and other animals, of course, have the potential of transmitting of diseases. But what I wonder myself all the time is, why is wildlife trafficking such an appealing black market business for organized crime groups? Because it is very lucrative, because it is considered as low risk with limited possibilities of prosecution, sanctions, or detections, because many countries still lack strict national legislation and appropriate penalties for illegal wildlife trade, and because wildlife crime is treated as low priority by enforcement agencies. Therefore, there is an urgent need to review the directive on the protection of the environment through criminal law, in order for the EU to retain its position as an effective global player in the fight against wildlife trafficking. Wildlife and forest crime must be considered as serious crimes. The new EU biodiversity strategy, which includes commitments to update the current EU action plan against wildlife trafficking, and which explores revising of the environmental crime directive, is an opportunity to rectify this situation. That is why MEPs for Wildlife bring together today a variety of stakeholders to discuss this important issue of wildlife crime. The question is how people can be discouraged from engaging in illegal activities that are highly damaging to biodiversity and the survival of species, but which are viewed as low risk and which generate high income due to the lack of severe penalties and low chances of being apprehended or prosecuted. Enjoy this webinar. I'm sure it will be a very good debate here. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Hilda, for your great introduction. I'm now delighted to welcome our first speaker for today, a highly distinguished speaker this morning. It's Catherine de Bolle. She is the Executive Director of Europol. Before taking up this post, she was the General Commissioner of the Belgian Federal Police, after having spent several years as the Chief of Police in Ninove. Catherine served as a member of the Executive Committee of Interpol for several years as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Catherine. We are very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say about developments on environmental crime in the EU. And also, we're very curious to know whether wildlife crime will feature in the upcoming new Serious Organized Crime Threat Assessment, also known as SOCTA. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear Mrs. Woutmans, honorable members of the European Parliament and dear guests, I would like to thank you for inviting me to contribute to this important debate on wildlife crime, one of the most critical areas of environmental crime. Environmental crime has a direct impact on our lives, such as increased levels of population, a degradation of wildlife, and a reduction of biodiversity. These crimes can cause long-lasting ecological damages and endanger human lives. Environmental crime is a highly lucrative criminal activity for organized crime groups. It is a highly profitable, but the sanctions are much lower and crimes are harder to detect. Involvement in the illegal trafficking of waste and in endangered species of animals and plants is routine for many organized crime groups. To respond to this crime threat in 2017, Europol established a team focusing on environmental crime. It was also the year when the environmental crime was added as a priority crime area in the Impact EU policy cycle. And over the last years, there have been steep increase in the number of information and cases dealt by Europol in this crime area. In 2020, 56 new cases were initiated and over 2,700 messages were exchanged through our secure communication platform Sienna. To compare, in 2018, 14 cases were initiated and over 1,300 messages were exchanged on envy crime. This is a high increase in just 2 years. Let me mention to you a few operational examples to show the latest trends. Last year, operations coordinated in the context of the Impact, so the policy cycle, resulted in over 600 ivory items, 300 reptiles, and 32 kilos of glass eels seized. I also would like to mention Operation Lake. Operation Lake is Europol's flagship operation on tackling environmental crime. It is an annual operation aimed at stopping trafficking of glass eels. The European eel population has decreased by 90% in recent years. Law enforcement activities against eel trafficking could be partly responsible for preventing the species from being wiped out. Operation Lake has been executed 4 times now, and during the actions, Europol experts on environmental crime have coordinated hits against glass eel trafficking by holding coordination meetings, operational meetings, and by analytical support. Since the start in 2016, the overall result of Operation Lake is over 400 suspects arrested, over 16 tons of alive glass eels seized and reintroduced to their natural habitats, as well as over 400 tons of eel meat products seized. Regarding the policy framework, we welcome the Commission's initiative to revise the Environmental Crime Directive, and we believe that the directive has proved it is needed in the European Union. However, now the evaluation process shows the need of its revision. I can only focus on parts relevant to law enforcement cooperation and the possible impact on our operational work. The directive could, for example, be used to define more clearly all the different aspects of wildlife trafficking, including those aspects that make it a serious crime. This would allow national law enforcement authorities to investigate it as a serious crime rather than, as it is often the case now, an administrative issue. In several cases, environmental crime is organized crime, and behind the selling of certain species is a full network of criminals performing the activities to make illegal profits. In the preparation of the new Serious and Organized Crime Threat Assessment, we have identified emerging trends. Traffickers increasingly target endemic European species alongside sites and non-listed sites, fauna and flora. Trafficking mainly occurs through legal business structures, especially in destination countries. In the destination countries, the illegally acquired wildlife is brought to legal marketplaces, such as pet stores, for instance. Document fraud is a key for this kind of activity. Online marketplaces, social media, but also encrypted applications are used for selling, buying, and sharing knowledge on hunting and breeding techniques for the wildlife. To conclude, environmental crime is posing a threat to the EU with multi-layered detrimental effects in regards to our environment, biodiversity, economy, and ultimately human health. We welcome the steps taken so far and the future ones by the Commission and the Parliament to provide an updated legislative and policy tool to the EU to counter environmental crime and wildlife trafficking. I also would like to thank this MEP group for promoting this very important topic. Future policy initiatives, such as the upcoming EU agenda on serious and organized crime to tackle organized crime by the Commission, can offer an opportunity to reflect on a comprehensive approach to tackle environmental crime, including wildlife trafficking. As Europol's mandate is currently being revised with better analytical capabilities for the agency, we aim to further strengthen our support to the member states in this and in other criminal areas. Our experts and our expertise are at your disposal, at the disposal of the EU legislators, to support your discussions from a law enforcement perspective. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for this great introduction to Europol's work. I'm glad you actually mentioned the glass eels issue, because I think that people often forget that Europe is a source country for a source region for wildlife products. We're not just a transit or consumer country, we also produce them. I'm also sure that the MEPs for Wildlife Group are very keen to see wildlife crime being tackled as a form of environmental crime in the new SOCTA report. I'm going to move on to our next speaker, Jorge Rios. Jorge will be a very familiar face to all those working on the issue of wildlife crime. He is the Chief of Global Program for Combating Wildlife and Forest Crime and Sustainable Livelihoods at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, in Vienna. He has been working on the issues of drugs and crime for the last 27 years. Jorge is a senior expert from the UNODC to the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime, which is a partnership that was formed back in 2010 and comprises of the CITES Secretariat, Interpol, UNODC, World Bank, and the World Customs Organization. Jorge, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear Ms. Valkmans, the chair of the MEPs for Wildlife, Ms. De Bol, the director of Europol, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here with you today to talk, to present the case really this morning on wildlife crime as a serious crime and the importance of treating it as such across all EU member states. What I'm going to present is perhaps not new to many of you, but it's still, again, the level of this crime is such that it's often times overlooked. It's not a priority, and certainly given the examples that we have from our work and our research, we realize that it is one of the most under-prosecuted serious crimes that we're involved with. And this, coupled with a very high demand and a lucrative economic earnings, is very attractive to criminals. Ms. Valkmans said, you know, what makes it attractive to them is the high prices, but I would add to that clearly the very low chances of getting caught and the even lower chances of being prosecuted and sentenced is really what makes this crime very attractive. The criminals that we deal with are highly organized. They're very innovative, well-connected, and they really run global operations, all the way from sourcing the product in X country, getting the product out of that country, ensuring it arrives at the country of destination, and that the end consumer or the buyer gets what they've paid for. They control all of these stages, from source to transit to destination. Just like, DHL, just like a lot of these legal operations. We must understand that it's highly complex. These supply and value chains are very complex, and they're managed really in a very detailed way. And the criminals, they exploit the weak legislative frameworks and a weak judiciary, and they do their calculations. They decide very, very cautiously where to operate. And this is very simple to do, really. It's easy when the rules of engagement vary significantly from state to state. The next slide, please. This one. What's the scale and the magnitude? It's been previously discussed just a few minutes ago, but I think we need to start this dialogue understanding that the EU really is a source, it's a transit, and it's a destination market for wildlife. And when I say wildlife, I'm also referring to timber and to marine species. Now, the EU seizure records demonstrate this from the thousands of endangered species, all the way from rhino to ivory, to pangolins, to protected species, to eels, to reptiles, birds, medicinal plants, timber, you name it. It's all there and it's all recorded. So it very much allows us to understand just how involved the EU as a whole is in this trade. We released a report in July 2020, and I'm glad to say that the EU Commission released it with us. It's the second version of the UNODC World Wildlife Crime Report. And in that report, you can read that nearly out of 180,000 global wildlife seizures that we were able to analyze, 18% occurred in the EU, with routes connecting the EU to Asia, to Africa, to Latin America, to North America. Really, this is a global trade. And if we use the estimates that law enforcement uses, normally customs, on seizure data, they use plus or minus 10% of what's being seized as indicative of the market. So if we use that figure, we can see that this market is significantly higher. So what's the impact of wildlife crime? Wildlife crime clearly has cross-cutting consequences for people, for communities, and for our planet. So the biodiversity loss, the climate change. According to the UN Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the IPBES, over 1 million species will go extinct in the coming decades if we as a whole do not significantly alter the way we manage our natural resources. The IPBES has sent a very clear message that overexploitation, which includes the issue of wildlife crime, is one of the includes the five existential threats to our nature. But let's be clear, wildlife crime not only drives many species towards extinction, this is clearly one of the issues we need to consider, but it very much contributes to degrading entire ecosystems and the ability to sequester carbon and to mitigate climate change. So really, these broader agenda issues that we're all dealing with are directly impacted by the issue of wildlife trafficking. We have other reports. We have the WWF report released on what's happening with species extinction. We have the Forest Watch report on the state of the world's forests. And this one, highlights that every 6 seconds, a tropical forest the size of a football pitch is being lost. And these are tropical human forests, really the most important forests we have on the planet. What more do we need really to understand that we need to alter the way in which we address these issues and in the way really that we mainstream criminal justice and law enforcement to address this? This is no longer just an issue of biodiversity or climate or conservation or management. This really is an issue of ensuring that we look at this as a whole. Nature is completely connected to everything we do, and it shouldn't be separate from our actions on the criminal justice side. Now, the revenues. We know that wildlife crime, just like every other serious crime, is facilitated by corruption along the entire criminal supply chain. It robs communities of natural resources. Many communities depend on natural resources for their livelihood, for their subsistence. And it also affects safety and directly contributes to this growing illicit economy. The World Bank recently, in one of their reports, estimates that governments lose between $7 to $12 billion in fiscal revenues per year on the illegal trade of fish, fauna, and flora species. So that's a huge amount. The reason we're perhaps not sitting in the same room together is because of what's happening today with COVID. The COVID crisis has really brought all of this to a head. It's allowed us to look at wildlife in a different way. Trafficked species we know are being handled in ways that escape sanitary control with very little supervision and can clearly lead to the spread of zoonotic diseases. We know that 75% of infectious diseases are transmitted from animals to humans. Again, what more do we need to understand that we need to better regulate the way in which we deal with nature, the way in which we encroach on nature's territory? We need to start looking at markets, breeding facilities, restaurants, all of these places that trade wildlife, if we're really to take, I think, a proactive stance to ensuring that we don't, in the very near future, encounter another COVID-like situation. But trafficking in wildlife and also in natural resources is a security issue. I think we need to make that very clear, not only because of the huge amounts of money that's involved and which are invested in other crimes, because we know that it does and it can fuel conflicts in many parts of the world. Wildlife crime also converges with other forms of crime, including the trafficking in arms, drugs, trafficking in persons, etc. Traffickers, these criminals are businessmen in the way that they have multi-commodity issues to deal with. Whatever makes money here or there, they will get engaged in. So it's no secret, it's no surprise, that they're involved in many of these crimes at the same time. And also the facilitators, those who allow these crimes to happen, whether it's those that sell the passports, whether it's those who turn a blind eye in the customs line, these are the same folks that are facilitating the trafficking in arms, the trafficking in drugs, and the trafficking in wildlife. And also the methods for moving the finance and the corrupt practices, they're very much the same across the board. The Eurojust report recently released just in January this year, on judicial cooperation in environmental crime, which was mentioned, analyzed 14 complex transnational organized wildlife trafficking cases in the EU. In all of the cases, wildlife crime was committed along other crimes: fraud, forgery, corruption, cash smuggling, money laundering, etc. The convergence with other forms of serious crime presents a threat within and outside the EU borders. However, by investigating wildlife crime, we can at the same time attack these criminal networks who traffic other resources. We can see wildlife crime perhaps as some have already identified as the underbelly of serious organized crime. You know, it's easy to find someone selling wildlife on the internet. It's very difficult to find someone selling 2 or 3 kilos of heroin on the internet. You know, so by going after really these folks that are trafficking wildlife crime, we can gain an entry point into the broader criminal syndicates. We need to take advantage of this. Wildlife crime has very often been perceived as an African or an Asian situation, a problem not really affecting the EU. And while many countries are making significant progress in detecting, investigating, prosecuting, and adjudicating these crimes, it's unfortunate that, in our opinion, the EU is not acting as quickly. For example, not all EU member states meet the serious crime threshold in their legislation for wildlife crime. The EU Action Plan Against Wildlife Trafficking calls for member states to make wildlife crime a serious crime in line with the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. One of the prerequisites being that it be a crime punishable with a maximum sentence of deprivation of liberty of at least 4 years. However, some national criminal laws fail to criminalize the attempt, participation by accessories, and the possession and sale of illegally obtained specimens. Even when the appropriate legislation is in place, some EU member states continue to apply very light penalties to wildlife crime cases. They're either low sentences with reduced jail time or very low fines. An example from where I currently live, WWF and BirdLife recently published a report analyzing the court penalties for wildlife crime cases over the past 12 years. And the report, actually surprising to me, concluded that the sentences were too lenient, with low fines and 3 to 6 months conditional prison sentences for these crimes. For example, a 3-month conditional prison sentence and a 12,500 euro fine was recently handed out for the poaching of 2 endangered lynx in one of the national parks. Another example, in Belgium, 3 Chinese nationals were sentenced to 15 months of imprisonment, half of which was suspended for smuggling 2,000 seahorses and ivory products. Last year in Germany, the court sentenced an ivory trafficker to 20 months in prison for smuggling 1.2 tons of ivory. That's a whole lot of elephants. It was one of the largest ivory seizures ever recorded in Germany. The prison sentence was suspended and the convict was given probation. You do your calculation, clearly, this is a very high reward, low risk crime. An analysis of these cases not only demonstrates a very weak and non-deterrent jail sentence and fines, but also significant discrepancies amongst jurisdictions. Again, criminals, they do their math, they do their analysis. And up to now, trafficking into or out of the EU makes perfect business sense. On the other hand, African countries have really made a significant progress over the last several years to make wildlife crime, both in their national legislation and in their courtrooms, serious. For instance, Kenyan law sanctions wildlife, the crimes in wildlife, with a minimum of 7 years imprisonment, while the law in Malawi sanctions these crimes with a maximum of 30 years of imprisonment. A couple of examples. Court in Namibia sentenced 4 men to 14 years of prison each for the organized trafficking of rhino horn and leopard skins in 2016. And last year, court in Zambia sentenced an ivory poacher to 7 years imprisonment. I think, sometimes we hear that many countries tell others what to do, and the countries that are being told what to do come back with the argument that those that are saying something really need to step up to the plate themselves. And I think this is a perfect example of this. Europe can no longer, should no longer tell other countries what to do unless it really starts doing, taking these issues seriously. So in the end, what contributed to these changes in laws, the changes in making it a serious crime, and changes in the adjudication? It was actions by the parliamentarians calling for wildlife to be treated as a serious crime. The narrative is clearly that low prosecutions, low sentences, low fines make this a clear and obvious crime to be involved in. So what can be done? The EU is very fortunate. It has a wide range of tools, technologies, and resources at its disposal to increase the way that it addresses wildlife crime. A legal framework which dissuades wildlife crime across all EU member states should be adopted. Significant monetary fines, not alone, but alongside proportional prison sentences, will have a strong deterrent effect. Again, criminals, they do it for the money, they want their money, and they don't want to go to jail. That's across the board. Stricter penalties will not only help to reflect the market value of seized wildlife products, but also impact on the way that we address biodiversity, health, and climate. And what's surprisingly is that member states of the EU have still not made serious crime a predicate offense for money laundering in the EU member states. And we've been advocating this for a very, very long time. So in the end, prosecutors, law enforcement, members of the judiciary, all must work together to investigate, prosecute, and adjudicate these crimes. And this only starts when the EU member states make wildlife crime a serious crime under the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. Thank you.
Joe, the mic.
Sorry, it's quite disheartening. Thank you, Jorge. It's disheartening to hear actually that wildlife crime in Europe is not yet, a clear priority and is seldom sanctioned in proportion to the gravity of the offences that have been committed. These are issues that I'm sure will be commented on by our other panelists this morning. Let me use this opportunity also to introduce them all. Please can everybody on the panel turn your cameras back on so that the rest of the world can see you. The first panelist that I would like to introduce is Jose Antonio Alfaro Moreno. He's from the Europol's EU Organised Crime Unit. He's taking over on the panel from Katrien de Bolle, since she was unable to join us for the entire meeting. Jose Antonio is a senior specialist in environmental crime and related areas, and has been so since 2016. And before this, he served in the Spanish Guardia Civil for almost 17 years. He's joining us today from Madrid. Next up is Dr. Wouter van Ballegooy. Wouter is a legal and policy officer in the unit dealing with criminal law and judicial cooperation within the European Commission's DG for Justice and Consumers. He is currently working on the revision of the Environmental Crime Directive. Before joining the European Commission, Wouter worked in the Impact Assessment and European Added Value Directorate of the European Parliament. He holds a PhD in European Criminal Law from Maastricht University. Our next panelist, just in case you thought we were getting a manel, is Francesca Carson. Francesca is a legal officer for the EEB, that's the European Environmental Bureau. She leads the work on trade and due diligence and has worked extensively on the implementation of EU laws in member states and other broader horizontal legal issues such as participatory rights and access to justice. Francesca has a legal background specializing in international law and maritime law. Next up is Dan van Oom. Dan is a postdoctoral researcher at the Willem Pompey Institute for Criminal Law and Criminology in the Netherlands. Since getting his PhD in criminology from Utrecht University in 2016, he has conducted research on various forms of environmental crime, such as transnational illegal wildlife trafficking, deforestation and timber trade in Southeast Asia, illegal mining in Latin America, and also the illegal trade in dogs in Europe. And last but not least, let me welcome Mario Kern and Andrej Koporec, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who are both serving police officers in Slovakia and have a lot of hands-on experience on dealing with wildlife crime. Mario has a military background, but has also worked for the Slovak police force since 1995. He is a police expert who investigates the most serious cases of environmental crimes. And since 2009, he's been the director of the Department for the Detection of Hazardous Substances and Environmental Crime of the Criminal Police Bureau in the Slovak Republic. This special police unit has the competences to investigate significant cases in the field of environmental crime, to lead special education training for policemen from local police units, and to provide international and interagency cooperation. So he cooperates with Interpol, Europol, and other international subjects. I think more member states need one of these units, but we'll get back to that later. His colleague Andrej Koporec has worked for the Slovak police force since 2005, serving as a police expert on environmental crime for the past 13 years. During his career on the police force, he has participated in the investigation of the most serious cases of environmental crimes in the Slovak Republic and has worked as an expert in many international projects in the field of environmental crime. He is the head of the investigation unit and the co-driver for the environmental crime priority in the European multidisciplinary platform against criminal threats, EMPACT. And he is also a member of the CITES enforcement group of the European Commission. Thank you all for joining us today. If you'd all like to put your cameras back on, because I don't think everybody is on. Okay, our speakers have already certainly given us a lot of food for thought. From your various different areas of expertise, we'd like to hear what you guys have to say about how people can be dissuaded from engaging in illegal activities that are highly damaging to biodiversity and the survival of species. How can we ensure collectively that wildlife crime doesn't pay, but is instead severely penalized? Let me start off by asking each of you some questions about the current state of play, the global interlinkages between other kinds of crime, and the implementation of the existing rules on environmental crime. I think we're going to work today down from a broad level before getting to the nitty-gritty of the Environmental Crime Directive itself. If any of you want to respond to anything that one of your fellow panelists has said, just wave your hand and catch my eye, and I'll come to you shortly. Dan, let me start off with you. We've already heard from Jorge about the convergence of wildlife crime with other serious crimes. Could you tell us a bit more about how it relates to, for example, drugs trafficking or the arms trade, or even militias and terrorism in Europe and elsewhere in the world?
Thank you so much for this excellent question, Joe. Based on my current research on the diversification of organized crime into environmental crimes, I look at the convergence between environmental crimes and other serious crimes, including wildlife crime and drugs or wildlife crimes and weapon trafficking. So based on this research, what I see when we're talking about the source countries, it's clearly visible that there are linkages, for example, in Southeast Asia between people involved in opium crops in one particular season, and then in another season the same people are getting involved in poaching, for example, big cats. Another example, clear example, is that different illegal activities are combined, so different forms of contraband are combined with each other. For example, smuggling timber together with drugs, or smuggling tiger skins together with methamphetamine from Myanmar, Burma into China. So you see there that there are clear linkages, but also in terms of investments, where crime groups with also a link to Europe invest from their profits that they made based on drugs, invested into wildlife crimes because of the fact already mentioned by colleagues before, the low sentences, but also the low chances to being caught. I think it is really important here to acknowledge that crime convergence exists, but still we need more research how this also takes place in the European setting, how European groups, for example, collaborate with their counterparts in other parts of the world, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, or in Africa. In relation to militias, one last final point. Yes, this is definitely also a point of concern in the source countries. For example, in the Congo, you see that militia groups work together with crime groups in transporting ivory trade, which contributes to the conflict, but also supports the Congolese groups with arms. So there you see another linkages between militia groups, but also in the case of Southeast Asia, you see that wildlife traffickers deal with militia groups that control a specific territory to pay them to allow the illegal wildlife trade going through their territory.
Great, thank you. I just realized I didn't introduce Martin Hojsík, who's also joining us today. He's going to be giving the concluding remarks. Martin is a MEP from Slovakia, so just say hello. Martin, if you would also like to make any kind of interventions, please wave your hand, let me know. Okay. I'd like to actually ask the next question. Our law enforcement agents that are on this webinar today, Mario and Andre, in your work at a country level, do you also see any convergences or links with other kinds of crime like narcotics in the wildlife crime cases that you uncover? I mean, could you give us some examples of the kind of connections with other kinds of organized crime that you see? And, you know, could you also tell us just a little bit about what have been some of your largest investigations in Slovakia with regard to wildlife crime?
Yeah. Thank you. It's important maybe to say about history, investigation, these cases in my country, because when we started in 2002, we had a problem with information, with information, with knowledges about this crime. It was new in Slovak Republic, and when we had first information about illegal activities, for example, first cases were about nest robbery, golden eagles in Slovak national parks, about illegal trade with reptiles, tortoises, and parrots by Slovak territory to West Europe countries. And these cases were with very rare species. And after first cases, we understood that it's a real organized crime, because by investigation we found it typical activities very similar in other parts of criminality. So drug, narcotics, and weapons, etc., etc. And what was a big problem for us, many from these cases were with international cooperation criminals. Slovak territory in this time was only as a cruise between source countries, as Africa, Asia, Balkan countries, and buyers were in Germany, France, Belgium, etc. And we fight against this only in our territory. It was mistake. And by first cases, we understood that we have to change. We had to change how we will fight against this crime, because it's a typical international organized crime with impact for not only environmental, its impact against economical activities. And we investigated some corruption cases in this area. And it's important to say about this history. It was from 2002, maybe 2012. We had in this time special team with 3 investigators and 6 police officers for intelligence activities. And I can say we had success, because we opened door and we showed our authorities and maybe our society, and for us it was new that yes, exists illegal trade, exists organized crime in this area. And Andrei can continue about real cases.
Thank you for invitation. We are very glad that we can be here. I would like to share our experience from our investigation. As Mario mentioned, we started almost more than 10 years ago, and we find out that Slovakia is a quite small country, but because of our position on the east border of the European Union, we are quite significant in illicit trafficking in wildlife. It's because of our history and very good connection of many our citizens to the East European countries in former Soviet Union and so on. For example, started with some investigation. It's very important to say, when you want to have more evidence about organized crime groups, you have to always use a complicated and more sophisticated instrument of the criminal law, as a wiretapping, interception, and so on. You cannot detect organized crime by administrative inspection and so on. So using our wiretapping, we detected that we have several perpetrators in our territory which are very active at international level. Their role is to legalize specimens which are illegally smuggled from certain countries to the European Union, and then with how to say legal origin, they are sold to European Union. So it's a really big challenge for us to detect all these perpetrators and stop them. During our investigations, we find out that it's not so easy as it looks when you read some instruction or manuals, because these people are very clever and very well prepared. As you mentioned before, there is some connection to another organized crime groups area. For example, in some of our investigation, we detected that our perpetrators used same organized crime group for smuggling the wildlife as a goods to the European Union. For example, we know that they have some places where they collect all the specimens, and then when everything is prepared for transport, for example, the corrupted officers are at board and so on, the transport is shipped to the Slovak Republic and then to our perpetrators' facilities. We had several years ago very big case about the illicit trafficking in parrots, and we were very, very surprised how it can easily work at EU level. We know from our interception that the perpetrators had a big competition with other perpetrators from European Union, and we were very surprised that we never detected this modus operandi from other countries. So I believe that it works very, very effectively. We were also very surprised in this case. For example, it was about the shipment of smuggling parrot eggs from Caribbean island to the Slovakia. They usually sent couriers regularly to the Caribbean, and they bought a Parrot X according to the wish list we sent before, and they bring this Parrot X in the check-in luggage without any electronic devices. It was just packaged in the chocolate box cover with plastic, with the price $2 and everything. It looks 100% as a present gift as a souvenir from foreign visits, so no suspicion for customs. It was luckily that we had the interception and we heard everything. I was personally presented in the airport in Vienna, and when we detected them and when we asked them what is inside of the chocolate box, they told us just a chocolate. When you put this chocolate box into the X-ray machine, you will see something that looks like organic material, which is round shape. So it can be chocolate, it can be Parrot X, it can be everything. If you don't have intelligence or interceptions, in this case, I'm 100% sure that there is no possibility to stop these offenders. For example, we know that they had something like they check the level of level of safety of the airports. So they have a very intensive communication, and they check the newspaper. If some shipment is stopped at the airport, they inform each other, and next time they use other airport. For example, in our case, they use the system that the first airport in the Schengen wasn't the last airport where they finished their destination. It was because when, for example, they flew to Germany, then they had to change the flight to the Vienna, and from Vienna they took a car and traveled to Slovakia. But in this situation, the customs in the Germany, they don't have a time to check the luggage because insufficient time. And then the customs in the Austria, they don't know that these people are going from Caribbean, because according to the flight, it's a flight from Germany. So there is no need to conduct any customs inspection and so on. So we know from interception that this way of smuggling is very effective, and we can be sure that it works almost everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. That gives so much insight into how the networks are actually working. I just want to, going back to the issue of convergences, Jose Antonio, question for you. Given the convergences that our previous panelists have noted with other serious crimes, what do you think the role of Europol should be in the international context in the years to come? How, for example, will environmental crime be addressed in the next policy cycle by Europol?
Thank you, in first place, for the invitation to this discussion. I would like to take this opportunity to focus a little bit the topic. Okay, some preliminary questions following up with the expositions of my previous colleagues. We have to think about something. What is wildlife crime? I mean, Dr. Dan van Hom just mentioned, and the UN representative, Mr. Jorge Rios, mentioned as well. Wildlife crime is a broader phenomenon than only trafficking. It's important to be conscious that the wildlife trafficking is a medium, okay, but before we have poaching, we have probably deforestation, we have due to the deforestation, we have illegal mining probably in several countries, pollution associated with the use of chemicals. I mean, it's everything is connected, and we cannot illegal fisheries as well is another topic which sometimes is from the European perspective is treated in a separate way to wildlife crime when it's actually affecting to wildlife species. It doesn't matter whether we use it for meal or for pets. It's wildlife species. It's important. So in our perspective, we should focus on the broad picture. So wildlife crimes, generally speaking, include timber trafficking, IUU fisheries, and all these kind of related topics. Poaching, illegal poisoning, which is a phenomenon which is not taken into account, but it's a common phenomenon worldwide. And in Europe, it's a common phenomenon not only in the southern countries, but in the northern countries as well. It's quite important. And everything, at the end of the day, everything is connected. So this is the first preliminary point I would like to point out. Secondly, okay, we are always talking about the interconnection of environmental crimes, generally speaking, and wildlife crimes in particular, with other criminal areas, because it seems that this way we put into context the high relevance of wildlife crimes. But we have to think that wildlife crimes are themselves important enough to be treated as serious crimes. And we don't have to put them into connection with drug trafficking, with other criminal areas. Is there a connection? Indeed, there is a connection. But honestly, the loss of biodiversity, how can you value it in economic terms? How can you evaluate this in the effect of over the habitats? How can you evaluate how the trafficking of glass seals, of Anguilla anguilla, is affecting to all the maritime species which are fed by the eggs, which cross the Caribbean, from the Caribbean Sea to the European coast in this process? So how can you evaluate it? You know what I mean? Wildlife crimes are relevant by themselves. So it has to be reflected somehow in the legal framework, which is another point, because we can complain about the low level of sentences we have, about the low level of cases initiated. Maybe we are working on it hard for the last years in the impact framework and here from Europol, but we need a proper legal framework, because honestly, we cannot blame prosecutors and judges to not be very aware of the phenomenon if they don't have the proper tools. And they can, you know, we all practitioners cannot invent the laws by ourselves. We need some laws, and then we can work with and we can initiate investigations. It's another important point. As a matter of a joke, we say sometimes that in the world there are more researchers studying environmental crimes than officers tackling environmental crimes. So the lack of specialized units in the EU is there, and it has to be faced.
That's an issue that we're going to get onto a little bit later.
Yeah.
So we'll get back to that.
But I just wanted to mention it. Yeah. So what can Europol do in this in all this business? Of course, we have a dedicated team since 2017. The work in environmental crimes in Europol comes from around from previous years, and honestly, we are doing a hard but very supportive work to the member states in terms of intelligence, of building the intelligence picture, because in other criminal areas there is a broad background. And the first thing we have to do is, okay, what's actually happening concerning wildlife crimes? And at this stage, I think we have a clear idea of what is happening. We have settled down our priorities, and this is the first step. And in the future, I think we are talking about organized crime. We are talking about the globalization of the phenomenon. We are talking about trades and flows. Then probably Europol has to play a more, how to say, supportive role in terms of concrete support to the national investigations. Of course, we are under the Europol mandate. As the executive director mentioned, it's being reviewed right now. So we will probably be able to provide some more concrete support. And we are talking, we are working in this consent right now. Global phenomena need global answers, and in this term, EU agencies, and particularly Europol, has to play a more concrete role in national investigations.
Thank you. I'm very aware of the time, that we actually only have half an hour left, and I haven't even got to a couple of our panelists yet. I got 101 questions to be asking you all. I'm going to skip a couple and get straight to both Wouter and Francesca, given that we haven't yet heard from you. I've kind of been saving up my questions for you on the Environmental Crime Directive, but perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on why or whether wildlife crime should be recognised as a serious criminal activity in the EU under EU law. You know, what kind of penalties can someone smuggling endangered wildlife out of or into the EU expect to get? Does this differ between member states? And could you give us some examples? Maybe Wouter first.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So what I wanted to do, and also acknowledging already the report that Francesca has been crafting, so I look forward to hearing from her in a second as well, is that criminal law is very close to member states' national sovereignty. And this needs to be put as a first point of reference when we are discussing these matters. And this is also important for me to stress that we have a current legal framework which is stemming from 2008, which is Directive 2008/99 EC, which is the Environmental Crime Directive, which did a lot of things, but it did not harmonize criminal sanctions. And I think it's very important for us to realize that from the bat when we're talking about this area. What it did do is it described the offenses that member states need to criminalize on the basis of serious violations of administrative obligations. Mind you that environmental crime is not just about wildlife crime, it's about a lot of activities, many of which are legal as long as they're permitted under administrative law, and only become illegal when they're unlawful. So we need to really keep that in mind. It's an extremely complex legal domain, and I think this is also why investigators, police officers, and prosecutors are struggling so much in bringing these cases. So this directive required liability of both, criminal liability of both natural and legal persons, but only required criminal liability for natural persons, including inciting, aiding, and abetting. And as I said, it didn't talk about the types and levels of sanctions, Joe. So that's the answer to your question just now. It did only say that member states have to have in place effective, proportionate, and dissuasive sanctions. And as we have seen from the evaluation that was referenced before in 2019 and 2020, large differences in criminalization remained across the member states. And this was also, of course, mentioned in the prior interventions of Mr. Rios in particular, and José Antonio, you've also referenced it just now. And there is another problem, let's just say, is this cross-reference to administrative law, which has become a very complex system of over 70 already at the time, and now many more directives in notably the field of the environment that were referenced. So the prosecutors have to go behind the directive and into all those other directives to understand what the criminal behavior is that they need to go after. If they're not specialized in the field, probably they won't bother to begin with. So this is a big problem as well. Then we have a number of terms in the directive referring to, for instance, substantial damage, which are then interpreted very differently across the member states. And if you have differences in the interpretation, this could also mean that cross-border cases fail. Sanction levels I just mentioned also differ significantly. Now, the consequence of that is, and I think the gentleman from Slovakia mentioned that before, is that you might be able to use certain investigative tools in one member state, but not in the other, because they are linked to the levels of the sanctions that can be imposed. Okay, and I also wanted to reference, just like Jorge Rios did before, the Eurojust report, which is also extremely interesting. One headline which I found striking is that only 1% of its casework deals with environmental crime. Again, we're talking about the fourth largest crime in terms of its impact, and only 1% of its casework. I think that, and final point I wanted to raise for this intervention is that we have a big problem with the fact that member states don't collect and disseminate data on environmental crime. If we don't have that, we don't have a clear picture of what is going on and how we need to respond to it at the EU level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wouter. Francesca, I know that you were responsible for drafting, writing and publishing a report, Crime and Punishment, and I seem to recall the title, about the implementation of the Environmental Crime Directive. Could you tell us, reflecting on what Wouter's just said, could you tell us a little bit more about your findings about the failures of the working of that directive, and maybe some examples on wildlife crime specifically? Please unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, well, to add on to what everyone has mentioned, I think we're all on the same page on this issue. Yes, last year the EEB published a report called Crime and Punishment, looking at 3 dimensions of enforcement in environmental crime. The first being on the effectiveness of enforcement actions. So how enforcement actions are taken by authorities and detection. The second was looking at crimes committed by legal persons, so companies and corporations, and what role they have in committing environmental crimes. And the third was looking at the golden formula of effective, proportionate, and dissuasive sanctions, and what that actually means in practice. And well, there's a few things to be said really on all these 3, but in a nutshell, what we found is that there's really a link between the effectiveness of enforcement, so of detection, and the level of the sanctions. There are various case studies throughout the report. The report is essentially a collection of different case studies to illustrate certain problems of enforcement in environmental crime. And a couple of them point to really the relationship that exists between detection and also the sanctioning, because it's that combination which makes environmental crimes generally, but also in this case, we're talking about wildlife crime, so lucrative and so attractive. And in a sense, if sanctions are low, it not only reinforces the idea to perpetrators that environmental crimes are not serious, that they're just administrative, you'll be fined, and in the end, if you get caught, of course, and in the end, you can continue to make profits. But it also isn't very encouraging for enforcement officers to prioritize the detection of these crimes. And I think perhaps that's where it's it makes sense to look at environmental crime and how that is coupled to other serious crime. But I fully agree with Jose Antonio when he says that environmental crime needs to be looked at a serious crime in and of itself, because how do you establish what sort of a fine should be imposed on certain cases? And this is what we saw in some of the cases illustrated in the report. For instance, there's IUU fishing of the bluefin tuna. Now, IUU is not actually considered an environmental crime under the Environmental Crimes Directive for various complicated reasons of the Environmental Crimes Directive that we might get to. But of course, the fine that was imposed for selling illegal bluefin tuna over the span of, I don't remember how many years we wrote in, how many years it actually went on for. In the meantime, these fishers have made a huge profit that also damages legitimate fishing practices. Another example is, for instance, and this is not really in the category of illegal wildlife trafficking, but other wildlife crime, such as the ortolan poachers in France, in the end were given more or less 1,300 euros fine. And how do you really put a price to that, especially when it's systemic? And especially if some hunting practices are cruel, how do you quantify that? I actually came across a report by Interpol on a recent study that they did, Operation 30 Days at Sea in 2019. And there were some very interesting findings from that report. So although that report was on marine pollution, it really, the issues that were highlighted there very much translate also to wildlife crime and environmental crime generally. But if you don't look at the cost that authorities or that the public cost of actually detecting a crime and then seeing what sort of penalties are imposed, then you realize that it's actually not very beneficial for the public purse to sometimes even investigate these crimes if the sanctions are so low. So there's really a multitude of factors that need to be looked into to see whether sanctions are effective, dissuasive, and proportionate. And that is looking at the severity of the crime. And there have been also some guidelines made, proposed by the Council of Europe on recommendations on gravity factors for offenses against birds, for instance. Some member states have also come up with their own sentencing guidelines that have somewhat helped to increase sanctions. But really the severity there, you have to look at, as has been mentioned by all previous speakers, what is the interlinkages with other forms of crime, such as fraud, or how do you really put a price to the environmental crime? You also have to look at whether it's a one-off crime or a repetition of a crime. As I mentioned before, the economic cost of detection, cleanup costs, and of course the profit of the crime. It needs to really be a deterrent factor. And in the end, it should educate offenders not to reoffend. Most of the offenders don't commit environmental crimes because they have something against the environment. They really do it because they want to have high turnover and profit. And so we have to make sure that it simply isn't profitable. And unfortunately, that's not where we are.
Can I just ask in terms of, you know, and this is, let's say, opening up to the rest of the panel as well. I mean, do you think that the penalties should actually be harmonized in the EU? And, you know, should the penalties be more severe? And what would actually act as a real deterrent? Because what I'm hearing from you is that, you know, that deterrent isn't there. I can see Dan also wanting to come in. If you can just give me a really like 30-second response to that, and then I'll move to Dan. And I think there were other people trying to get my attention.
very quickly then, so I agree with what has also previously been said by one of the speakers, I don't remember who, but that organized crime cannot be tackled with administrative fines. On the other hand, administrative fines are sometimes more effective because judicial fines can be very time-consuming and also resource extensive for the public purse. So administrative fines can be more effective. It's really the level of the fine that needs to be established. Sorry, your question again, just to get at my thoughts.
On deterrence, whether it's whether harmonization and deterrence.
Yes, harmonization. Yes, it absolutely needs to be harmonized because, as has been also mentioned by our other panelists from Slovakia, if you have a cross-border instance between Vienna and another place in Germany, you really need to make sure that you're not creating a safe haven for crimes within Europe. So far, we have very little information of what sort of sanctions are imposed in cases, in real cases. So there's lack of information on this. The information that is available that I know of has been collected by NGOs so far, in looking at, for instance, wildlife. But it really shouldn't come from NGOs to make this study and this evaluation. I think it's more helpful if authorities themselves are able to exchange this information and cooperate together, especially as we're in, we're in one union and it does affect the single market.
I would very much agree with that. Dan, could you just chip in very, very quickly on this? Unmute yourself.
I definitely agree that it's really important to go for more harmonization due to the waterbed effect that criminal networks anticipate on regulations in the national setting. So yeah, that I really share this with Francesca. I think two other important points to mention here is that first, the connection between environmental crime and other serious crimes is important in the sense that we can have a better understanding of the networks by collaboration between different departments. For example, police investigations can share their experiences about the same networks. I think we should get rid of this idea that networks operate on a single market solely. What we see increasingly is that actually crime groups are working as business entities, that they focus on different crimes in their criminal portfolio. In addition to that, of course, also the linkages between upper world activities are extremely important. How do corporations use their corporate business for facilitating illegal trafficking? How can we understand corporate and organized crime ventures in the context of wildlife trafficking to better react to it, in contradiction to focus solely on organized crime networks? And final point is in relation to regulation, enforcement, but also sanctions, is that important that we highlight the important value of species or the environment itself, so that we shift our focus from perpetrators towards also the victims, that we embrace ecocentric principles in our systems to understand how punishment can be beneficial for the environment in the context of reparative justice, for example, instead of extending and focusing only on higher punishments or economic sanctions that work generally not really effective and do not benefit the environment at all.
Thank you, Dan. We can see we're desperately running out of time. I really want to ask Wouter about where things stand at the moment. He's intimately involved in the process of revising of considering the revision of the Environmental Crime Directive. How do you see that moving forward? Where is the Commission currently at with its review? If you can, give a very, very brief summing up, because unless everybody is prepared to stay a little bit longer, we're going to have to wrap up in about 8 minutes time. And Martin Hojsík has also got some closing remarks. So please, the floor is yours if you unmute yourself.
Sure, I will make it short, and luckily we were prepared for this. I'm not sure if someone can pop up the screen of the public consultation of the European Commission that's currently ongoing, or if that's technically possible right now. Great, because at this moment you don't. Oh, hang on, you can still hear me, because once that was done, my screen started to jump.
We can still hear you. No worries. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's the most important thing, because my computer didn't like the changing of the screens. So at this very moment, it is actually the moment for you, the people that are connected to this seminar today, and the general public, to have your say. We have put forward a number of policy options to address many of the problems that we have heard the panel discuss today, ranging from definitions to sanctions to cooperation across borders, but also cooperation between various agencies within the member states. That is something to be tackled now in the revision of the Environmental Crime Directive, which we intend to put forward by the end of this year, so that it can be negotiated under the French presidency started to be negotiated in 2022. The website here is up, and we invite anybody to express their views on how we should move forward with this process.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to add on the current process, timeframes, that kind of thing?
Sure. So maybe to be more specific, drafting legislation takes time. It's extremely complex. So the public consultation is open until the 3rd of May. So that's the first date I would like to announce to the public here. And then afterwards, of course, we will take that into account in preparing the legislation on behalf of the European Commission, and then putting it forward to the co-legislators, which is the European Parliament. I do realize that we are an MEP for Wildlife seminar today, and the Council of Ministers of the Member States.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one very, very, very last question. I have many, many more, but we really need to wrap up. This question I want to direct to both Mario, Andre, and Jose Antonio. If you can give a lightning response to it. Do you think that specialized units such as the one that exists in Slovakia should be established in all national law enforcement agencies in order to uncover environmental crimes like wildlife crime? So, Jose, Mario, okay, you first.
Sorry. I am sure that yes, because by investigation with international organized crime, time to time we have a problem, because we don't know who can be our partner in other country. In third countries, maybe as Belarus, Ukraine, maybe Montenegro. Yes, okay, I can accept that they are out from the European Union, but in European Union we write that we will have a partner for investigation, especially if we have very sensitive cases. For example, with connection with corruption, with money laundering, and big economic impact, and it's for us problem, and it's our idea to maybe to press by our authorities, but by our clerks in Brussels, in European Union, to change this situation. I don't know which way can be effective, how we can change this situation. But I absolutely agree with this idea that in all European countries, we need the same department or special police unit for investigation this environmental crime, especially if it's organized environmental crime. Because in the European Union are very small countries, and perpetrators know that it's very easy to go by border and you are relatively safety. A specific problem is, for example, our capital city. From Bratislava, you are in Austrian territory after 10 minutes, in Hungarian territory after 15 minutes, in Czech territory after 1 hour. It's very easy if you smuggle some animals, or if you want to change document or other. The same we have with illegal hunting our protected species, because they change document and they go very quick in other territory, etc. I agree absolutely. I think it's a very good idea.
Thank you, Jose Antonio. Very quickly.
It's basic. If we don't have a specialized unit and trained staffs, then we won't uncover the environmental crimes, because environmental crimes have to be uncovered. They are hidden crimes. They don't exist. It's not a murder. It's not a murder of a human being. You have to explore it. You have to look for it. And international cooperation is not possible if you don't have nobody to cooperate with in other countries. So it's basic. Legal framework and the outstanding work the Commission is doing right now has to be pointed out. It's crucial for the next years, and the building of specialized units, in my opinion, are the basis for the work.
Thank you. I can see a comment from Jorge Rios also saying, in addition to this, we also need specialized prosecutors. That's also a very good point. Unless anybody has something really burning that they want to say for the next 30 seconds, any point that they need to, Andre, okay, then speak, and then I'm going to hand over to Martin.
Yes, I would like to highlight only one point, that in the European Union, we are in one marketplace. And if one country doesn't implement the legislation properly, it makes that all criminal activities can be legalized through this country, and all measures in other countries are useless. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to have a separate meeting organized in the future, just to be looking at all these law enforcement issues, because there's so much to discuss. But in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to our other MEPs for Wildlife member, Martin Hojsík, to say a few words to close this meeting.
Thank you, Joe. It was really an interesting discussion to listen to, and I have to say, Andre, you actually took part of what I wanted to say, which I'm very happy about to hear from a law enforcement official, because this is the really experience on the ground. Yes, we are a single market, and if we don't harmonize the rules vis-a-vis also the wildlife crime, we are having a problem. And it's not only about the rules, it's also about the exchange of information. It's also about having the sufficient capacities on the ground. So yes, it's a very, very important. But the closing remarks are also about very important thing, and that's thanking people. And thank you, Tilde, for hosting this event. And a big thank you to all the speakers and participants, because I think this shows the level of interest, which I'm very happy to see that it's high. I'm especially happy to see Slovakia represented in this discussion, because I'm happy, despite knowing how many challenges we face on the ground, it's also good to be able to share the kind of best examples and where we can inspire others. And I think this is also about the European cooperation. And I'm really looking forward to see lots of useful amendments in terms of the upcoming Environmental Crimes Directive revision. I think this is something where we have to really keep a close eye on it. And we know where the gaps are. We just need to really close the gaps and deal with it. And of course, the action plan for wildlife trafficking is something where has shown that we have something that we need to address these problems. And I don't like to stay with action plans. I actually want to see a real action. The revision of the directive is expected in Q4. So don't forget also to participate in the public consultation because it's not only about the MPs, it's really about all the stakeholders having a say in how we should shape this legislation. I believe that the public has high expectations, and it's our duty to fulfill them and really, meet these expectations. So I'm hoping that together with other MEPs of wildlife, we'll be cooperating across not just institutions and member states, but also different political groups. Because ultimately, what we have is one objective as something: protect the wildlife. And to the end, I had kind of, it's a bit cheesy, but Jane Goodall is a really inspiring person. I had the honor to have her on one of the events I co-hosted, and from her, the statement of only if we understand, we care. Only if we care, will we help, and hopefully, if we help, shall all be saved, is something which I think underscores the challenges that we face and that what we can do about them. So thank you very much for participating, and it was a pleasure, and looking forward to more discussions and real changes on the ground. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Martin. And I'd like to thank all of the panelists and speakers today for your participation in this event. I apologize that we weren't able to cover all of the issues that I actually wanted to ask you. And I think I will propose to the MEPs for Wildlife Group to have a second meeting on law enforcement issues later in the year, because I think there's a lot that can be discussed. And I think it'd be great to have some more member state engagement on this issue. So be prepared to perhaps be invited back to come and talk to this audience. Our next meeting is likely to be on the issue of trophy hunting. So that will be before the summer. So please, follow our activities. We'll send you the information on the next event, and follow us on social media as well. So with that, I would like to close this meeting, and thank you all once again. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.